In this video, we're going to be comparing the cheapest 16-inch M1 Pro MacBook versus the most expensive maxed out M1 Max variant. Now, in terms of price difference between the two, there's a massive difference. So this base model is $24.99 versus $38.99 for the maxed out M1 Max. And in this video, we're going to be seeing if the increased memory bandwidth and encoder chips and extra CPU and GPU cores make a difference, how hot they make the M1 Max compared to the base model M1 Pro, what effect they have on battery life, and finally, if the extra price is worth it. Now, I will also have timestamps down below if you want to skip to a relevant section. I also have both of these laptops charged to 100%. So I'm going to unplug both of these machines from their chargers, and at the end of the video, we're going to see which one has the most battery life remaining. So let's quickly start with pricing. So like I mentioned before, the base model 16-inch M1 Pro MacBook starts at $24.99. We have obviously the 10-core CPU and the 16-core GPU, 16 gigabytes of RAM, 500 gigabyte hard drive, and obviously you also get the single hardware encode and decode chips, and you also get a 200 gigabytes per second memory bandwidth. Now, contrast that with this machine over here. The price tag on this is $38.99, which is a lot of money. It's about $1,400 US more expensive than the base model. Now, for that extra price, you do get some significant jumps in its specs. So you have 64 gigabytes of RAM, 1 terabyte SSD, 10-core CPU, and a 32-core GPU. And perhaps more importantly for editors or 3D modelers, you get a doubling of the bandwidth from 200 gigabytes per second to 400 gigabytes per second. Now, apart from that, they are both essentially the exact same as well as physical. So first things first, let's do some quick CPU benchmarks on Geekbench. So I'm just going to start the CPU benchmark and also the metal GPU benchmark, and I'll report back with the results in just a second. So the Geekbench results are in, and on the CPU test for the multi-core score on the base model 16-inch M1 Pro, we got 12,503 versus 12,549 on the maxed out Max version. And moving on to metal, we can see a significant difference, 41,618 on the base model versus 65,831 on the maxed out M1 Max. So moving on to Cinebench, which is a much more effective benchmark in my opinion, because it actually puts the CPU under some stress and some heat. So we're gonna start this particular benchmark, and about halfway through, what I'll do is I'll come back and I'll show you guys the internal temperature of the CPU, and I'll also show you the external temperature of both MacBook chassis. Okay, so we've got about 2.5 minutes left in the Cinebench benchmark. As you guys can see, I have TG Pro up here having a look at the temperature of the internal CPU and obviously the cores. On the base model 16-inch, we're hovering at about 92 degrees Celsius average. You can see these performance cores are nice and toasty at around 90 to 95 degrees Celsius. Likewise, on the maxed out Max, we're roughly the same, about 2 or 3 degrees hotter. You can see some of these cores are running quite a bit hotter than the base model. This also might be just due to TG Pro. It's not always 100% accurate, but you can see that on average, it is running hotter on the Max. Now, if we switch to the thermal view of the chassis, you can see their thermal signatures look very, very similar. So coming in onto the hottest part of the base model M1 Pro, we're sitting at around 42 degrees Celsius. Over the middle of the keyboard here where the actual M1 Pro chip is located, about 42 degrees. And then onto the edges of the chassis, we've got around 31 degrees Celsius. Likewise, on the maxed out M1 Max, up here near the exhaust fins, we've got about a degree hotter, so about 42, 43. In the center of the keyboard, just on top of that M1 Max chip inside, we've got about 43. And then on the external chassis again, maybe about 1 degree Celsius hotter, but not a massive difference. Okay, and the Cinebench results are in. So on the base model, we had 12,312 for the multi-core score. And then on the maxed out max version, we have 12,340. Again, no surprises there. They both have 10 CPU cores. So moving on to some video transcoding, I'm using Compressor on both of these machines. I have the exact same Sony a7S Mark III 4K clip loaded up here. It's about 2 minutes worth of footage, very compressed H.264 codec. So these are the compressor settings I'm using. I'm going to transcode into Apple ProRes 422HQ. So we've just finished over here and also here as well. So if we come over to the completed tab, they both took 17 seconds to transcode. So no differences there at all. Okay, so moving on to Lightroom, and this is where we might see a difference between the two. Obviously, this only has 16 gigabytes of RAM versus 64 gigabytes on the maxed out version. So opening up Lightroom Classic, we have 50 24 megapixel raw photos here from a Sony a7S Mark III camera. As you can see, swiping through all these images of the created cat, we're having absolutely no issues at all, both performing the exact same. So we're now going to actually export all these images and we'll see which one takes the edge. And interestingly enough, guys, they both exported the same 50 photos in almost the exact same amount of time, just over 30 seconds. Okay, so moving on to some 3D modeling. So I have Blender up here. Now, in terms of cycles, that's very CPU heavy. There's almost no difference between these two. So I'm actually going to move on and do some EV renders and some editing, and we're gonna see if there's any major difference between the two. So let's start with the Party Tug splash screen. So this is a pretty popular demo file on Blender. I have it loaded up here. You can see we have EV selected as the render engine. Now switching between the different viewports up here, you can see they're both about as responsive as each other. If we go to the maximum quality viewport shading, they both load up exactly the same. Can't really detect any kind of differences. If we hit play on both scenes, this is where you are going to see quite a big difference because we're getting about 8.3 FPS on the maxed out M1 Max, but we're only getting about 4.5 FPS on the base model 16-inch M1 Pro. So coming back to frame number 1, let's come up here to render and we're going to render a single image and we're going to see which one is quicker. And as you can see, the base model M1 Pro finished in 9 seconds and 26 milliseconds versus on the maxed out M1 Max, just 6 seconds. So definitely a respectable performance from the M1 Pro, but if you were doing lots and lots of renders and they were several thousand frames at a time, you will definitely see a massive decrease in render time with the Max. So moving on to another popular splash screen on Blender, I have the Splash Fox animation here. Again, this is an EV render, as you can see in the settings here. So we're actually going to play this and we're going to switch between the viewports, get some shading and some higher quality in there, see if we can see a difference, and then moving up to the maximum quality setting. And now taking a look at the difference in FPS playback between the two, we do have again a clear winner. So on the base model M1 Pro, we're getting just 1.85 FPS, and then on the maxed out M1 Max, we're getting about 3.5 FPS. That's more than twice as good. So we're gonna come up here now and we're actually going to render out 30 frames each on both devices, and we're gonna actually see which one performs the best. So we're about halfway through the render. The M1 Max is obviously starting to pull away in terms of speed. Now, taking a quick look at the activity monitor, we can see on the base model M1 Pro, Blender is using about 12.4 gigabytes of RAM. And you can see here the memory used is almost 13.7 gigabytes. And we're not using any swap memory, surprisingly, so that's good. Now moving on to the M1 Max, we're using actually less RAM for the specific Blender process, but we are using much more RAM overall, about 12 gigabytes more than the base model Pro at 25.95 gigabytes. And obviously this is the 64 gigabyte version. Now that both renders have completed, the results are in. So again, a clear winner. The M1 Pro had a final time of 5 minutes and 3 seconds to render 30 frames versus 3 minutes and 29 seconds on the maxed out M1 Max. Now moving on to some editing, I'm going to try out some 4K and also some 8K Red RAW footage. As you can see right here, I do have the most updated version of DaVinci Resolve. This is the M1 Silicon native version. I'm using the same footage as before, so some Sony a7S Mark III footage, 4K, 10-bit, 422, really compressed H.264 video codec. So typically some pretty tough footage to not only edit, but to just play back. As you can see, both machines are handling this footage very, very easily. You can see if I come down to the timeline settings, we are at 4K. So no issues there at all. In terms of scrubbing, both of them are quite smooth. You're getting a couple of dropped frames on the base model version, but then looking at the Max version, I'm really not seeing very many dropped frames at all. So it seems like you're getting a slightly better experience on the M1 Max, the maxed out M1 Max. So let's do a quick stabilization effect. As you can see, this first clip in the timeline is about 2 minutes long. So we're actually going to come down here to the mixer tab and we're going to add the stabilization effect. So we had 59 seconds on the base model 16-inch M1 Pro versus just 41 seconds on the maxed out M1 Max. Now again, not a massive difference, but imagine if that particular clip was 5 minutes long or 10 minutes long instead of just 2 minutes. You can really start to see the effect it might have on your editing experience. So I've just rendered out these timelines. They're both 6 minutes in length. So the base model M1 Pro finished in 3 minutes and 11 seconds versus on the maxed out M1 Max, 1 minute and 41 seconds. Okay, let's have a look at some 8K timeline scrubbing and rendering. So I have some 8K Red RAW footage here, basically some of the best, highest quality footage you can get right now from cameras. So let's just get started and playing back these timelines. Now, both of them are playing back in a 4K timeline resolution. So let's hit the spacebar and have a look. Okay, so they're both performing about as well as each other. They buffer for a little bit before you can see the FPS counter up there turn green. So let's move to some scrubbing. And we're going to scrub this shark scene. And let me know down below if you can see a difference between the two here. So in terms of scrubbing, I think they're both very, very similar. If we move to a different clip, I think maybe the M1 Max is slightly better, but not a massive difference. Now, of course, if you drop the timeline resolution down to 1080p, you will see a marked improvement in performance. As we can see, if we play the shark scene, it takes them a little bit less to actually buffer and for the FPS counter to turn green. And now if we actually scrub again, a little bit better. And when I render out these timelines, surprisingly, there's only a 2-second difference. So 3 minutes and 38 on the base model M1 Pro versus 3 minutes and 36 on the maxed out Max. So I'm gonna put this discrepancy down to some kind of possibly software compatibility issue between the two. As we saw in the previous test, the M1 Max, the maxed out M1 Max, should have come out ahead. So I did test it twice, same result. So possibly DaVinci Resolve needs to be updated or something, but we might come back to this a little bit later on. Now moving on to some Final Cut Pro, I wanted to test a previous project in Final Cut Pro on both of these machines. It's quite a long timeline, about 25 minutes, and it is also a multicam. So I have 3 different streams of footage. I have one coming from a Blackmagic 6K camera that's recording in ProRes 422. I have the overhead cam, which is a Sony a7 Mark III, and that is recording to an external recorder, a Ninja 5 from Atomos, and that is also in ProRes. And then lastly, I have the same camera as the footage I was using in DaVinci Resolve, so the Sony a7S Mark III. As you can see on both computers, playback and scrubbing is about the same. That is because we're using Final Cut Pro. It's very optimized. We're also using majority ProRes footage, which just plays really, really well with macOS and Final Cut Pro. The biggest differences between the two is when we render out both of these projects. You can really start to see that the maxed out 16-inch version destroys the cheaper base model M1 Pro. Okay, so moving on to some gaming, let's do a couple of benchmarks first before we get into the real life performance. I have GFX Bench here. I'm going to start the Aztec Ruins high tier score, and we're gonna see just how much of a difference there is between the 16 core GPU and the 32 core GPU. So looking at the results, the M1 Pro base model got 79 FPS, versus on the maxed out M1 Max 120 FPS. So again, a pretty significant result, but let's move on to some more real life testing using the Tomb Raider benchmark. So as you can see, the display settings are both the exact same. Moving on to graphics, again, the exact same as well. So we're going to hit the R key and we're going to run this benchmark. And after running the benchmark, we got 47 FPS for the base model M1 Pro versus on the maxed out M1 Max, we got 79 average FPS. Okay, so let's have a quick look at After Effects, because I know a lot of you guys are artists or 3D modelers or animators, and a lot of you use After Effects. So at the moment, I have just a very basic end screen for my YouTube videos that I occasionally use at the very end. As you can see, it's playing back perfectly fine in After Effects. We are only at a 1/4 resolution. So let's switch this to full and let's come back here so they both have the exact same time to buffer, and let's play. So we'll also try to take a look at any kind of FPS difference between the two. And you can see down here after a couple of seconds, the maxed out M1 Max is destroying the base model. So we're more than halfway through buffering this particular scene. Okay, so if I switch the resolution here to half on both of them, and then we play both of them, you can see that they're both loading up quite quickly. Obviously the edge is going to the M1 Max, it's loading much quicker than the M1. Okay, so we're now rendering out both of these projects, and I do expect there to be a significant difference here because After Effects can be very, very RAM hungry. And obviously we've only got 16 gigs versus 64 gigs. So if we actually bring up the activity monitor on both of these laptops, we'll have a look at just how much RAM these machines are utilizing. So on the 16-inch version, Adobe After Effects is using 11.2 gigabytes, and the render core is using 7.45 gigabytes, for a total of about 12.7 gigabytes, also using zero swap memory. Versus the maxed out M1 Max, we are using 48 gigabytes of RAM. That's Adobe After Effects. The render core is using 17 gigabytes for a total of 57 gigabytes of RAM in total. And you can see that there is definitely a massive difference between the two, because if you look down here, we are almost finished on the maxed out M1 Max, and we're not even a quarter way through on the M1 Pro version. Okay, so the base model M1 Pro has finally finished the After Effects render. You can see that it finished in 12 minutes and 39 seconds versus on the maxed out M1 Pro, just 1 minute and 54 seconds. So that is a massive, massive difference, guys. This is about 6 times faster. So if you're doing anything After Effects related, it's definitely gonna be worthwhile over the long run. A lot of this does come down to RAM. I did a video where I compared 16 gigabytes of RAM to 32 gigabytes. Everything else was the same CPU cores, same GPU cores, and we got a similar kind of result here. So maybe consider doing the 24 GPU core max and 64 gigabytes of RAM upgrade if you want. Maybe skip the 32. But again, guys, massive, massive difference here for After Effects. Okay, guys, so we've been going for about 2.5 hours at this point, doing multiple benchmarks, multiple renders, 3D modeling, animation, all that kind of stuff. Let's have a look at the battery life. So starting with the base model M1 Pro, you can see we're sitting at 60% battery life versus on the maxed out M1 Max, we are on 54% battery. So that is about a 6% difference, and if we extrapolate this over the life of the entire battery, so assuming we drain both of these batteries down to zero, it's about a 10 to 12% difference in battery life between the two. But don't forget guys, that is under full load. So we've been using both of these devices, editing, rendering, benchmarking. If you were just using them normally, doing some emails, for example, or maybe some web browsing and some YouTube videos, you would be using the high efficiency CPU cores. You probably wouldn't be using any RAM, and you probably wouldn't be using the GPU cores either. So they would work out to be about the same in terms of battery life. But again, I think for the increased power with this one, the 64 gigs RAM, the 32 GPU cores, which is double this, about a 10% difference in battery life under full load really isn't that bad. So guys, after seeing all of those benchmarks and results comparing these two machines, which one should you purchase? Well, let's start off with the power users and the professional users. So I personally think that if you need the power of this machine, it will be a worthwhile investment in the long run, but only for specific use cases and specific workflows. So say for example, if you're doing a lot of 3D editing or modeling, as you saw with Blender, there was a massive difference, especially with After Effects, there was a massive difference between the two. If you're consistently doing those workflows, or if you are a professional editor, and you want to reduce the render times by about 50% between projects. Say for example, you have a client and you need to slightly change something in a project, re-render that and get it to him ASAP. The extra power and the speed of this machine will be worthwhile. But I think that the base model 16-inch M1 Pro is already so good and a pretty good value for your money that the extra $1,400 US between the two, I don't think a lot of people are going to be able to justify it. And what's more is you can put that $1,400 US into other areas of your business or your professional workflow. For example, spending $1,400 to hire a contractor, that's quite a few hours that he can spend editing for you, for example, or buying an M1 iPad Pro to take on the road and potentially do some sketching and show to clients. $1,400 is going to get you a lot of extra stuff. But again, guys, if you're someone like me who spends all day editing, for example, and you do have the money to invest in a really powerful and high quality device, I think you can get away with the M1 Max, potentially the 24 core, 32 gigabyte RAM version, the 24 GPU core. I think that's probably the best bang for buck. Over 2 or 3 years, I think it's probably going to be worth the upgrade, but again, only for specific people. Anyway, guys, hopefully you enjoyed this video. Any comments or questions, you know what to do down below. But apart from that, I will catch you in the next one.